Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Reddy, and I am the world history teacher here at Kalama High School. I also am the drama director, if you happen to come watch Hadestown this weekend. That is why we have this lovely set stuff here. And I want to thank you all for being here this evening as we welcome Pete Metzelaar and his wonderful and amazing story of survival. We'll have a couple just brief words, and then we'll get right into Peter's talk, since he is the main event and reason we're all here today. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight, for this amazing example of hard work and perseverance by the students of Kalama High School. I serve as the advisor for the Seattle Holocaust Center for Humanities Southwest Washington Student Leadership Board, or SLB. The SLB was created with the express purpose to help engage students with the lessons of the Holocaust and to take these lessons to engage their peers and their community. I've had the great privilege of working with the Holocaust Center for Humanities since 2019, when I became a Powell Fellow, but I've used the HCH lessons since I started teaching in 2016. Over the course of my time working with the HCH, their mission has been close to my heart and what I do as an educator. I had the great opportunity to travel with them this past summer to Vienna and Poland, which was an eye-opening event in so many different ways. It was from this partnership that ultimately the Southwest SLB was born. As it was decided to transition from having an online-only meetings, conversations between myself and the center decided that we would split the SLB into 3 different branches. One in Seattle, one in Spokane, and then one here in Kalama. No other state that has statewide Holocaust education or Holocaust boards have a student-centered leadership board like the HCH does. So the opportunity that we offer these students in being able to engage with Holocaust survivors such as Peter and other survivors of genocides is truly a once-in-a-lifetime and remarkable ability that we can give them. The work that these students do on spreading the messages of the Holocaust and fighting for the memory preservation is second to none. I am so excited and happy to be able to present to you today the unveiling of our exhibit, Echoes of Survival. This was a process born of many hours of planning and preparation on many different people's parts. I would like to thank Lexi Jason and Paul Regelbrug, who are the leaders of the education team at the Holocaust Center of Humanity, who unfortunately, because this is Genocide Awareness Month, were unable to make it tonight. They are very, very busy with many, many other things going on, but they wish you all well and are very happy to see as many people who could come here today. I would also like to thank Elaine Bystrom and the staff at the Kalama Public Library for their partnership in this. They've been amazing and amenable hosts of our exhibit and have been great in helping to plan this event tonight. And I would also like to thank the members of the city and police staff and everybody who has come out to help and make sure this is a safe event for us all. And of course, I'd like to thank our Student Leadership Board members. Student Leadership Board, could you please stand? Give a little recognition. All these students have given up countless hours to make sure that this comes out amazingly. Thank you all for being here, and I would like you to please welcome Nevaeh Olinger, who is the president of our Student Leadership Board, as she has a few statements, One last thing before I pass the mic over. As you entered or as you exit today, there is a letter here. This is from our Director of Education, Paul Regelbrug, and this really kind of just goes over what exactly the mission of the Holocaust Center for Humanity is, what their intended practices are, and more importantly, how, if you so wish, to continue the support for programs such as the Student Leadership Board. These programs were only made possible by people who truly believe in the mission of the Holocaust Center. And so thank you all again, and I will pass this off to the band.
Good evening. As Mr. already said, my name is Nevaeh Olinger, and I'm the president of Southwest Washington Student Leadership Board through the Seattle Holocaust Center. Through this board, we aim to learn from history and the lessons of the Holocaust and how it's essential to combat hate in its earliest stages to prevent future atrocities. This year, we are honored to present our exhibit, Echoes of Survival. This exhibit is more than a collection of artifacts. It's a powerful reminder of resilience, courage, and the urgent need to stand against hate and indifference. These artifacts are on loan from the Seattle Holocaust Center for Humanity and will only be here for a limited time. So I encourage you to visit with your friends, family, and loved ones. It is a unique opportunity to connect with history right in your own community. Projects like this have been transformative for our board. They prove that simply remembering is not enough. We must reflect, educate, and challenge hate whenever we see it. This is what drives our board, and I hope it inspires all of us here tonight. As you listen to Peter's story or explore our little exhibit, I hope you take time to reflect on the impact this powerful message it carries. Together, we can create a community that fosters compassionate understanding. Thank you for being here tonight and supporting this vital cause. I hope you enjoy the speaker and our exhibit. I'm going to pass the mic off to Peter.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the first things that I'd like to mention to you folks, that if you're interested and if there are some questions, I do about 35 of these presentations every year, everything from the 8th grade to university, veteran groups, etc. And as I always say, if a question comes up, no matter how, I'll use the word bloody it may seem, no matter how insensitive it may appear to you, as far as I'm concerned, anything goes. And those questions will be at the end of my presentation.
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Can you
Is
turn
this
it up?
better?
Yeah.
Okay.
He got it.
Yes, speak up. Okay, back there? So, at the end of my talk, anything that comes to mind goes. There is going to be one subject that I'm going to shoot you down. I'm going to shoot you down with all my might and not get into it. No politics. Zip. None. Are you able to hear back there okay? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, let's get started. My birth was in Amsterdam. Anybody here been in Amsterdam? Oh my gosh, I got to tell the truth now. The slides that I have prepared, some of them are geared maybe to the youngsters a little bit more than to adults. And okay.
Oh.
I should have opened my mouth. I can do it here. Yeah. So I always like, for those that enjoy geography, the Netherlands, also known as Holland, it's just a, a very, very small, oh boy, a very small country on the western slope of Europe. And the reason I put the insert in there, you'll notice that the entire eastern border borders Germany. Now, one of the things that I am always very aware of especially when I'm talking to an 8th, 10th grader. They got enough about numbers, they got enough about English, they got, all day long, and here comes this bald old guy, he's got his story when he was a kid. And I like to use a comparison. And this is not a matter of not being up to those kids, knowing this event, but I use it as a comparison. And the comparison is this, that during one of the most horrible events of the United States, not that many years ago, of 9/11, when 3,000 innocent people lost their lives. Now picture this. I don't know, we got what, 35, 45, 50 people here. 3,000 innocent people lost their lives. The reason I bring that up, to give a comparison of what Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party did to the people of the Jewish faith. You take that 3,000 and multiply it by 2,000, and you come up with this horrible, I think our little doodad here, the battery, it worked before. It does not work now. Let me just advance it over here. 6 million people of the Jewish faith Adolf Hitler decided to annihilate. 6 million. By the way, if you want to use another comparison, the entire state of Washington has just under 7 million. So you can just picture every man, woman, and child in the state of Washington would be a comparison as far as the numbers. Of that 6 million, 1.5 million kids under the age of 12 Hitler murdered. And in addition to the 6 million people of the Jewish faith Hitler got rid of, he murdered 5 million Christians. We have no use for many of those people as well. Whether they're reverends, whether they're pastors, whether they're priests. That's the kind of operation that Adolf Hitler ran. Now, something that some of you may or may not be familiar with. The Netherlands was occupied in May of 1940. It was only a year before when Hitler invaded Poland in 1939. That was the beginning of World War II. In every country that Hitler occupied, he put certain rules and regulations into effect. They were referred to as the Nuremberg Laws. Every single country, and everybody of the Jewish faith had to adhere to it. There was no matter of, maybe I won't do it, maybe, and I'm going to show you some of them. You don't have to read them all, but I always point out a couple of them, especially one of them for the kids, how ridiculous it is. One of the laws, by the way, one of the laws that he acquired, and especially you people that have been to the Netherlands, and can you imagine the kids when they see that a kid could not ride a bicycle? Holland with no bicycles? Are you kidding me? That whole country lives on bicycles. And the other thing, of course, which most people are familiar with, by virtue of the physical aspect to it, that every single person of the Jewish faith, any time that they came out of their living quarters, they had to sew on a bright yellow star on their outer garment. Within that star, and I always like to call it, as far as the script, you can call it Hebraic script, but it would spell the word Jew. If you happen to live in France, within that star, it would say Yuf. If you lived in Germany, it would say Jude. And in Holland, it was Jood, J-O-O-D. Now, many times the question comes up, why did Hitler make those laws? And especially every single person that had to wear that star. I have to jump ahead a little bit. It was sometime in the middle 80s. My mom was still living down south. And on one of my visits, I found an old box with some photographs. And amongst those photographs, there was one picture which showed her when she was 22, 23 years old. And as I will show you in a moment, wearing a coat with one of these stars. I flipped that picture over, and on the back, oh, okay, I can do it from there, if necessary. I flipped the picture over, and there was a crumbling piece of paper, just about fell apart. And when I opened it up, there was one of these stars. I said, Mom, where did you get that? She said, don't show that to me. Get rid of that. I don't want to remember what took place associated with that star. Oh. I have a photograph. Is it working now? Okay, you got the magic touch. Okay. I have that picture. In Seattle, as we on the introduction talked about, we have a museum, an organization called the Holocaust Center for Humanity, and I donated that picture. It is on display at the museum. And this is a picture of Mom. Now, the importance of even showing it this way is that this star is this star. It's the actual piece of history. It is not a Hollywood, it's not a show. That is the actual star that Mom ripped off, and she didn't want to remember everything that was associated with it. Now, not only adults had to wear that anytime that they came out of their living quarters, but kids down to the age of 6 had to wear that star. Well, I don't know why they put that arrow on there, because it's pointing at a lot of hair, which I don't have anymore. Yeah, that's me. That's me in that picture. But like I say, even kids had to wear those stars. Now the question comes up, why did Hitler make the Jewish people wear these stars? Well, there have been many books written on it, there have been many theories on it, there have been many stories on it. One of them, of course, is to identify. Hey, there goes one of them. The other one, I have to question. Whatever your beliefs are, it doesn't matter. Should somebody tell you, you got to wear that on your chest? If you want to do that on your own, that's another story. But a foreign country is going to come over your borders and say, this is what you're going to do. Well, somebody, and I remember it was about 5, 6, 7 years ago, was a high school kid. And after we had the Q&A at the end, she posed an interesting question. Well, if it was to identify a Jew, don't wear it. Doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? One of the things that happened that I remember, Mom, Dad, and I, we lived in an old 4-story walk-up apartment. And I remember looking out the window one day, and I was 6.5 years old, barely 7 years old. And I saw soldiers rounding up No, I'm sorry, it must be my fingers.
You got to point it at the computer.
What's that?
I think you have to point it at the computer.
Use the computer, yeah, okay. German soldiers stopping people, asking for identification. As I said, the student was quite, I thought, bright, normal thinking process. Well, if the Jewish people identify that, then don't wear it. No, that did not work. Why didn't it work? Because something that took place in those days that will be taking place now, today. And that is this. Anytime that Hitler occupied a country, they took over the seat of government, whether it was the city, the state, whatever it is. The records. If any of you, hopefully this doesn't happen, but if any of us today have to have a procedure done in a hospital, among signing your life away that you have to pay, other than that, one of the question is religious preference. Today, you have to put that down. In case you die, the hospital wants to protect himself. So when they stopped you, they already had a list of who you were. Doesn't matter whether you wear that thing or not. Did not matter at all. They already had the list of the Jewish people because they took over the records of the city. And those people were moved away on trucks, eventually over the railroad stations. Nobody knew what happened. Where did they go? Somebody's aunt, somebody's dad, somebody's grandpa, somebody didn't come home that night. What happened? People literally did not know, had no idea. I remember one night, and I want to emphasize again, I don't do Hollywood. Everything that you are hearing is from memory. I forgot what I had for dinner last night. I don't want to tell my wife that, but I remember what happened that many years ago. And that is, anytime that a Jewish person was stopped and hauled away, and nobody knew what in fact happened to them, there were some decent people, as in every country, and there are so not such decent people. And when it came to the decent people, they just said, we've got to help these people. And so there was you can call it a resistance force, an underground, but nothing organized. 2 people in one block, another guy or woman in another block, and they would do things for the Jewish people they couldn't do themselves. One of them would be to fabricate false ID, so when they were stopped, hopefully that name would not be on the county, city, whatever, on the list. But the other thing that was even much, much more important, and how they did that at the risk of their lives. If they got caught helping a Jew, I am talking about they would be arrested and a bullet put in their head in the middle of the street. The Germans would not stand still for somebody helping a person of the Jewish faith. So how did they come up with people that said, yeah, we'll help out? And the underground would actually talk to people. You can imagine the danger in that in and of itself. How did they know who they were speaking to? Where they basically, in its simplest form, say, hey, would you be willing to shelter a Jewish person or persons? My mom found one of these so-called underground people. As I always say, it comes up a couple of more times during my story. I don't fabricate things. If I don't remember, I'm going to tell you. I don't remember, because it's my own personal story as I remember it. And that is, how did she find one of these people? I don't know. I don't know. Because everything was on the hush-hush. Everything. And they came up, was a Christian couple, Klaas and Rofina Post. They had a little bitty farm in the northern part of the Netherlands. And I guess one of those underground people contacted and say, hey, would you be willing to shelter a couple of Jewish people? And they said, of course. Here's the interesting thing. My mom and I were in hiding on this farm for 2.5 years. They were a very devout Christian couple, but they could care less about religion in its nasty form. Their attitude was, who are these foreigners? Who are those Germans coming across our border and taking our citizens away? We got to hell. Nothing to do with religion. Easy to pick on that and drive it into the ground with misinformation or who knows, stories. They just said, who are these Germans taking our people away? More and more people started to disappear. One day my mom was very upset, and she sat me down and she said, Aunt Katie and Uncle Leo have been arrested. What does that mean? I'm 7 years old. I don't know. It wasn't much after that. Very upset again, she says, Oma and Opa, Grandma and Grandpa have been arrested. I don't know how I worded it exactly. I said, what do you mean arrested? How do you explain that to a kid? I don't know what she said. I can only assume, well, it had to do with those soldiers out there. How do you explain arrested? And then came the day that she really fell apart. She sat me down and she said, Dad has been arrested. My dad used to like to fish. And he had a little 2-man rowboat. Amongst those Nuremberg laws, one of them stated that a Jewish person could not own a boat, if you want to call that a boat. He went fishing in his little rowboat on one of the canals in Amsterdam. That was not allowed. It was in June of 1942. He was arrested, and that's the last that you ever saw or heard of him again. More and more people started to disappear. So my mom recognized, we got to get out of here. In that way, again, how she found one of those underground people, I don't know. But Klaas and Rufina Post on this little bitty farm would shelter us. I have a picture of them in actually the farm, as I remember them. They had a couple of pigs, a couple of chickens, a couple of cows. That was it. And then there was maybe a half an acre of ground that from sunup to sunset, they worked their fingers to the bone, raising veggies, and they so willingly shared those with Mom and I. Keep in mind, they never heard of us. We never heard of them. It was humanity that came through. No prejudice. It was humanity that came through. We were on that farm, as I said, for 2.5 years. Many things happened. I'm going to mention a couple of them. Time being what it is, I can't go through all of them in that 2.5 years. The Germans started to find out that, oh yeah, there's Jews being hidden on the farm. And now the trucks came. Each truck with a dozen soldiers, rifles with fixed bayonets. They would absolutely massacre these farms, kicking over furniture, looking in every nook and cranny. You know, somebody's going to be hiding somewhere. Even stabbing into haystacks. Sometimes the kid was hiding, or an adult. And whoever they got out of there on the truck, and again, where did they go? Nobody knew. So one day Klaas came up with an interesting idea. This farm, when Mom and I got there, was probably already 30, 40 years old. It was old. No electricity, no plumbing. To use toilet facilities, had to go to an outhouse outside. The floor of that little farm were 12-inch boards of knotty pine. And Klaus had an interesting idea. One day he took a saw, and in the joints of those two floorboards, he cut a 6-foot section, and so you could open it up, 2 12-inch. And underneath, 1.5 feet, was the dirt and the filth of this old farm. Now, when Mom and I heard the trucks coming down the dirt road, we open up those boards and we crawl in underneath the floorboard, just 1.5 feet underneath the floor itself. Either Klaus or Fina would put the boards back, throw a rope, couldn't see anything. I mean, he had cut it right in the joint. Numerous times, I recall that Mom and I had to hide underneath there. It was frightening. It was so frightening. Mom and I could only fit in there like a couple of sardines. They would be walking. The German soldiers would be walking 1.5 feet over my head. All it would have taken is one sneeze, one hiccup, it would have been all over. But even that got to be, according to Klaus, too dangerous. Next to the farm, and I'm talking about 100, 200 feet away, was a little forest. Can't even call it a forest, maybe 1/2 acre of trees. And one day at dusk, Klaus told me to get a wheelbarrow and a couple of shovels. And I want to emphasize the word dusk. Of course, it being when it started to get dark. As I mentioned in the beginning, Mom and I were on that farm for over 2.5 years. Picture this. In the 2.5-year period, there was not a single time that either my mom or I could come outside during daylight hours. Never! Never! The reason being, of course, there were other farms in the area. You have no idea where the loyalty might be of those people. And if for some reason, either my mom or I were to come outside, somebody on those farms might say, hey, who are they? We don't exist. We don't have a body. We don't have a soul. We don't communicate. We don't speak to anybody. Never. So only at night, Klaus had made some homemade toys on the far end, away from the dirt road, in the back of the farm. When it started to get dark, I could play by myself with some toys. Mom could get a breath of air. It was a place where we took a wheelbarrow in this little forest area, and when we came to a rise, started to dig. After about 2 days, we ended up with a hole in the ground, or in the side of this hill, maybe 3 feet wide, 2 feet tall, 6 feet deep. Klaus went out of the area and cut down some trees, let them fall randomly over the roof. And he took the branches and interwove them. In other words, for us to get in, have to kind of step in, and it kind of snapped back by itself. You could stand right in front of it. It just blended with nature. Couldn't see there was anything there. So now, when Mom and I heard the trucks coming down the road, we'd run out to the back of the farm, and we'd crawl into this hole. It was one of the more frightening aspects that I recall for myself. Mom and I would be there, body to body, we're barely fitting in there. And there were 2 things that I remember so clearly that frightened me. One of them, every time that we'd crawl in this hole, dirt came trickling down. I was always afraid it was going to cave in. But the thing that scared me more than anything else, I am getting almost to be 8 years old. I'm aware my family is gone. I don't know that my mother used the word death. I kind of doubt it. But I knew there was danger, danger, danger. We don't exist as a human being. And the thing that scared me more than anything else, being that this hiding place was only about 150 feet from the farm, I could hear those German soldiers ransacking, kicking over furniture, looking, convinced somebody was hiding somewhere. I could hear them, but they couldn't see them because the camouflage in the front. And the thing that scared me more than anything else is that this time they're going to come and get me. I'm a little kid. What do they want with me? Where's Dad? Where's Grandma? Where's Grandpa? What are we doing in this hole? Scared the you-know-what out of me. Because I heard them. Are they coming? Well, you know, folks, I'm standing in front of you here. They never came. They never got into that part of our hiding place. It was in the middle of 1943 that the Allies, the Americans and the British, started to run bombing raids over the Nazi Germany to try and wipe out Hitler's war machine. It was just coincidence, that little farm that Mom and I were hiding on happened to be underneath the flight path as the bombers came over from England over to Germany. Now they came over, folks, and I can speak of this. And by the way, I know it's a bit of a distance, but have any of you been to the Museum of Flight at Boeing Field? Anyway, it's a wonderful museum. I volunteer over there. I give tours over there. But the bottom line being, the Allies used what is referred to as a B-17 Flying Fortress. It was a 4-engine aircraft, propeller-driven. When I taught the 8th grade, hey, do you know what propellers are? What? Propellers? No, not jets, propellers. They came over in formation of up to 1,000. I'm sure most of you have heard in the news or some of the horrors taking place in the world, the expression carpet bombing came from them. I am talking about 1,000 aircraft, and I happen to know the statistics. By the end of the war, those B-17s, who each had a crew of 10, dropped 656,000 tons of bombs on Nazi Germany. There wasn't much left standing. But when those guys got shot down, not many of them got out. The space inside of these aircraft was, courageous people. Unbelievable. The command in England decided to try and curtail the loss of life. And by the way, the Boeing company and its facilities built 13,000 of these bombers. By the end of the war, over 1/3 of them got lost. And as I say, they had a crew of 10, most of them did not make it. So the command in England decided to run those raids at night, hoping to curtail the loss of life, loss of materiel. It was one of those first night runs. I could hear them coming. The windows started to rattle, the ground shook, and I got petrified. To such an extent that I had to go to the bathroom in fears. But I was too afraid in the dark to go outside to the outhouse to use the toilet. So I asked my mom to take me, which she did. We stepped outside of the farmhouse. The drone, the noise overhead was deafening. I just looked up. Of course, I couldn't see anything. It was nighttime. And then a strange thing happened. We were standing in the dirt, and my mom had a little flashlight. And just so I wouldn't trip over my own 2 feet in the dark, She turned the flashlight on, and when she did, I smacked her in the abdomen with full force. She doubled up. Many years later, we laughed about it. It wasn't very funny at the time. What was that all about? Here she's trying to help, and I hit her and I screamed with all my force. Well, like I always tell the kids, and it doesn't have to be the kids, all of us were kids. But if you think of some very frightening experiences that each and every one of us as humans have experienced, there's always a situation where the mind either compensates, in so many words, hey, it's not, don't get so excited, it's not as bad as you may seem, or the mind make it even worse. Hey, Charlie, it's pretty bad. The psychological aspect that the mind helps do things with our bodies enters in this 8-year-old. Why did that hit my mom? I was so petrified that when she turned the light on, psychologically in my mind, I thought the bomb was going to come right down that flashlight. Crazy things, but under those pressures, it was reality. Mom and I, as I say, we were on that farm for 2.5 years. There were many, many other incidences. But after 2.5 years, the raids became more frequent. And in her wisdom, Mom decided we got to find another place to hide. Because it is not an unlikely scenario that one of these days we're going to get caught. It will certainly be the end of us, but not only us. It will be the end of Klaus, Rufina, and their entire family. The Germans would murder them, would send them to a death camp immediately. Once again, even on the farm, how did Mom find one of these underground people? I don't know. I just don't know. But they came up with a couple of women in the city of The Hague. The Hague is the seat of government in the Netherlands, like our D.C., Washington, D.C. They lived in a 3-4-story walk-up apartment, and they said, yeah, sure, we'll give them shelter. You know, it seems so strange. I remember so much detail when we were on the farm with Klaus and Rufina. And those women that gave us shelter in The Hague, I don't even remember their name. And one of the reasons could be, when we got there, the Germans confiscated all production of food for the military. And the non-Jewish people had to have stamps to get a certain ratio of food. Needless to say, the Jewish people don't even try. So we had to rely on these 2 women on scraps. They weren't very nice. They really didn't treat us very nice. Not only that, but any time that there was any dirty work to be done, whether it was cleaning the floors or the bathroom, they would ask Mom to do it. But we were hungry, we were starving. I remember we were there for approximately 8 or 9 months in hiding. And I remember 2 specific times that when it got dark, Mom disappeared. And she came back with a loaf of bread. Don't ask, I don't know. I have no idea where, how she got it. But these women just wouldn't share that. We had to be thankful. I mean, after all, they did give us shelter. We were there for about 6 weeks. And then my mom came up with a word that I hadn't heard for a long time. Scary, scary word. Which was, Peter, you haven't been to school. School? I'm one of them. I can't go to school. She says, I got false papers from the underground. She says, instead of Peter Metzelaar, get used to the name Peter Pet. Whoever that is. She said, if you ever get stuck, you have to go to school. If for some reason you get stopped, don't open your mouth. Just show them these papers that say Peter Pell, and hopefully that name was not one of the county records. That is another time that I was scared out of my gourd. For almost 3 years, I was so indoctrinated to not being a human being, to not having a body, to not having a soul, to have nobody to communicate, to shut my mouth. And now the star comes off and I have to go to a regular public school. I remember, I don't know how long it lasted, but being so indoctrinated of not being a human, and now just going in these strange kids that I felt that every one of them said, see, hey, there he goes, there's one of them. They didn't know me. I was just one of the guys. But I was so petrified, so afraid of being discovered as a human. It was the end of the first semester, and I noticed we don't have many youngsters here, but bear with me. Some humor in this. At the end of the quarter, we got our grades. Well, needless to say, we didn't have computers. And when I do a talk to 8th graders, 10th graders, whatever it is, I usually always ask them, I said, you guys get your grades, your printouts, computer printouts? And more times than not, they say, yeah. I said, well, of course we didn't have any, but we have in Holland at that time a booklet called a rapportboekje. A rapportboekje, a report book. It was a little book that the teacher wrote in the subject and gave you a grade. I still have it, the actual one. And it is fading, but it still has Peter Pell on it. And one of the things that I tell the kids, I said, you know, I have to tell you something else. You'll notice something different about that too, compared to you guys. I said, you notice that the grades are all alphabetical, 10 being an A. Not what you guys get. You guys get your A, B's, and C's. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to imply anybody here gets C's. Everybody gets A's and B's, right? Always get a big roar. Yeah, right. Anyway, there are a couple of fives over there. I think they're F minuses. It had to do with behavior. I didn't behave very well, which was really stupid. Probably drew more attention to myself, but I was so afraid, so afraid of being discovered. Now, something that most people are not aware of, and I always like to bring this up, and I asked the question, which was the first country on the planet to develop a missile, a rocket, for war purposes? And the answer is Nazi Germany. They had a very brilliant young individual by the name of Werner von Braun, who when he was 21 years old got his doctorate in physics, a PhD, and he and his scientists developed the first rocket for war purposes. It was called a V2. It stood 49 feet tall. It carried a 2,500-pound explosive, and they fired these things from the west coast of Europe daily over to England, where the bombers came from, the British and American bombers. They fired them every single day. Every single day. I have a picture of one of these V2s, and now I'm going to say another thing. At the end of the war, the United States the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France tried at the end of the war to apprehend as many of the, what I like to call the butchers of the Holocaust, at least those, and put them on trial for crimes against humanity. At least those that had escaped to South America, even the United States and Canada. But when it came to Dr. von Braun, the United States at the end of the war said, come on over, we can use you. It was the Nazi and 500 of his scientists that put the United States on the moon in June of 1969. Yes, he and 500 of his scientists, it is called, you can Google it, it's called Operation Paperclip. He was at Alabama, and it was he, von Braun, and his scientists that developed, up until less than a year ago, the largest and most powerful rocket ever to be developed, called a Saturn V, which is what boosted the Apollo moonshot. I have a picture here of von Braun in the cities over here with the butchers. There's one of these rockets, and there's von Braun in his later life in front of the Saturn V. He and the scientists were able to get us up to the moon. Now, as these rockets were coming over to England, trying to destroy the bombers, needless to say, the British weren't thrilled. And they had several well-known aircraft. One was called a Lancaster, a 2-engine bomber, and the other one was called a fighter. It was called a Spitfire. Matter of fact, we got one of those at the Museum of Flight. And they used to go into dogfights over the cities. Now today, in today's world of war, you don't hear much about dogfights anymore. Today, you got a very sophisticated machine capable of 2,000 plus miles per hour, a very highly trained pilot. All he does is hit a switch, and some rockets leave his wingtip at 100 miles or whatever down the road. So people get their brains blown out, some for the good, some not. But here's what happened, of course. Like all cowards, the Germans built anti-aircraft defenses right in the middle of the city. You can see the city in the background. Figuring the British aren't going to bomb us, being among civilians. Well, they did. So there used to be dogfights. The RAF, Royal Air Force of Great Britain, would fight the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. And there would be dogfights over the city. As the British came over to try and bomb the rocket sites, the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, would intercept, and there would be dogfights. Well, here's a crazy thing. And I will own up to it. I was one of these crazy guys. Most of adults are familiar in the United States, when the kids grow up, whatever age. We have a thing called trading cards, right? National Hockey League, the NBA, the NFL. Hey, Charlie, I'll trade you ho-ho-ho for ha-ha-ha, whatever. Well, no such thing existed in Europe, and probably still doesn't. But leave it up to the crazy guys. And that was, when those guys tried to shoot each other out of the sky, after it was all over, you could walk on the street and you could find pieces of shrapnel, exploded pieces of ammunition, anti-aircraft fire, high caliber bullet, exploded bombs, jagged, nasty looking pieces of steel. And what did we do? Yeah, I say we, I was one of them. We used to collect those. And we trade them in school. Hey Charlie, look at this funny one, I'll trade you for that. Are you kidding me? Trading exploded pieces of ammunition. I still, actually, to be honest with, I still have some of those. This is basically what it looked like. Steel, jagged looking, nasty looking. And we traded it. It was on a Sunday afternoon. A Sunday afternoon. That my mom took off her star. And where these women lived that gave us shelter was about a block from the park. And she took a chance. Get some air to the park. We no sooner get to the park and the air raid sirens on it, meaning the British are on the way over, the Germans are going to intercept, all you know what is going to break loose. Everybody ran into these underground bomb air raid shelters. Concrete, smelly, stinky, awful. You could hear bombs exploding, rat-a-tat and machine guns, but it was safe. And these things could last from 20 minutes to 40 minutes. And then it was over until a day later, or 2 days later. It was on that one day that they came over, Mom and I ran into one of those bomb shelters. Whatever time it was, 30 minutes later, the all clear sounded. Now this is on a Sunday, meaning I got school the next day. So I'm holding my mom's hand and I'm walking on the street. I'm looking to find pieces of shrapnel to trade at school the next day. As I'm walking along, I look up ahead, and maybe 30 feet in front of me was a piece of shrapnel, the likes I had never, ever seen before. Nobody saw anything that, it was twice as big as those three put together. Nasty chunk of steel, jagged. All I knew, I gotta have this sucker, because if somebody wants to trade me for this, they'd have to give me everything they ever collected. Nobody had ever seen anything that big. So I pull away from my mom. I remember I was wearing red Nami gloves. All the dumb things to remember. Red, I remember I had a little Namis on. And I go to pick this thing up. It took 2 hands to pick it up. I didn't care because I'm going to be a big shot in school the next day. Nobody'd seen anything that big. I was so proud of this thing. I pick it up with both hands, and I remember that heat came through my gloves. I didn't care. I'm going to be a big shot in school. I was so proud of this thing. I show my mom, and she takes one look at this. Doesn't say a word. I don't know what took place in her mind, but she takes both her hands underneath mine holding this thing and makes me heave it away. It wasn't 10 seconds. I do that louder with the kids and I tell them now you can go back to sleep. There is a 10-inch crater in the street. I have no idea what it was I picked up. But whatever it was live. It exploded. My only regret was I wasn't going to be a big shot in school the next day. I will not stand here either, folks. Not stand here either. Well, I'm going to tell you what is probably the most, I don't know, whatever the word is. The Germans called a conference in a city called 1C, the city south of Berlin. And in an hour and 20 minutes, they came up with the history books refer to today as the final solution. How to eradicate every person of the Jewish faith from the face of Europe. When that happened, these raids where they were going trucks up and down the street, arresting people, not kicking down doors, what have you, it became daily around the clock. How my mom found out, I had no idea. It's a question that I probably asked her, I don't know how many times. She either really didn't remember, didn't want to remember, was afraid to remember, I don't know. But Mom found out because there were so many raids, those women were too afraid that Mom and I were to get caught, which means those women would be arrested and killed for giving us shelter. Mom found out they were going to turn us in. You can't take a chance. Well, you have to get out of there. Once again, I don't know where the underground people came from. And they came up with a one-room apartment back in Amsterdam. Now, the city of Amsterdam and The Hague, only about 45 miles apart. But at that particular time, there was only one highway connecting the two. However, no civilians allowed. It was strictly used for German military convoys. I wake up one night and my mom is sitting at a little table with a candle, and what to me looked like a bunch of bed sheets, and she is sewing. I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Shut up, go back to sleep." I wake up a couple of 3 hours later, whatever it is, and here she made a skirt. She made a top with some buttons. She had a little hat. Sewing with my hand, she made like a nurse's uniform. I said, "What are you doing?" She says, "Get dressed. We got to get out of here." It was winter time. I got dressed. She got dressed, and she wrapped this contraption around herself, and we tippy-toed sometime after midnight out of the apartment. We had no belongings. And as we were trudging through the snow, I said, "Mom, where are we going?" She says, "Peter, I don't want to hear your voice. Be quiet." As we get through maybe another 3/4 of a mile, I'm 10 years old now. All of a sudden, I realized something. I said, "Mom," I said, "we're not going to this highway, are we?" She says, "Peter, we got to get to Amsterdam." I said, No, I'm so afraid, I'm so scared. They're going to get those snipers and people are going to kill us. She says, "I told you before, I don't want to hear your voice. Be quiet." As daylight came about, I could see troops marching on that road. I could see trucks with tanks on them, and I got petrified. And now we get to that highway, there's all this light going by. And now my mom does something, as I always explain, I know the video is going to hit the fan. With me holding her hand for dear life, she turns over and she starts to hitchhike. I said, "Mom, what are you doing?" She said, "I'm not going to tell you again. I don't want to hear your voice." It wasn't 10 minutes, and a flatbed truck stopped. And a Nazi SS officer. The SS were the worst of the worst. The black uniforms, the skulls on their caps. And this guy starts to read my mother the riot act. "No civilians allowed. What are you doing here with a child? This is for the fatherland." Blah, 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 blah. I have no idea why this guy would even give my mother a chance to explain. And here was her story. She says, "Sir, you know about the British trying to bomb the rocket site?" Ja. Ich weiß es das. So? Just the other day, one of the British bombs hit the apartment the kid was living in, and it killed his father and his mother. As you can see, I'm a nurse for the International Red Cross, and I'm taking him to an orphanage in Amsterdam. I don't know what the guy responded to. I don't remember he responded to anything. He grabs my mother by the arm, walks her over to the truck, and now he separates me from my mom. She is my only security. I am petrified. He walks Mom over to the cab of the truck. The Nazi officer, the driver, is still in the truck, and he helps my mom into the cab of the truck. Now he comes back for me. I don't know what's going to happen. He does not, again, say anything. He picks me up, puts me in the back of his flatbed truck in the snow. He walks over to the cab of the truck, gets in. My mom is sitting between the two Nazi officers. I'm sitting in the snow by myself. And yes, they took us where we wanted to go. They didn't know 2 Jews were in the truck that they were going to kill. Mom fooled them. I get way too excited when I get to this day. It's still, how did she ever come up with this? How did she ever come up with this? Anyway, they took us to Amsterdam. It was in May of 1945, exactly 5 years, that the Canadians liberated Holland. The war was over. Nobody in my family came back. Only Mom and I survived. We stayed in the Netherlands for another 4 years, until 1949, when I was 14, at which time we came to the United States for a better life. Now I have to interject 2 stories. Yeah, on a very serious subject, there's even a little humor. In those days, I don't remember, my mom had a friend in New York who vouched for Mom and I. But the laws were in such a way that once a parent became a citizen, if the kid or kids were, I don't know what age, a certain age, they would automatically become a citizen on their papers. Now, doesn't happen, I'm sure, anymore now. So we came here in 1949, you had to be here 5 years to become a citizen. She took whatever test they gave her, and she became a citizen in 1954. But I had to wait another year, because I was too old. I had to take my own test. So she was a citizen. I wasn't. And kind of tongue-in-cheek, whenever we got into arguments, she says, "All you foreigners are alike." She was a citizen, I wasn't. And anyway, we came to New York. 8 months later, we came to the West Coast. And here's the only other one. And I want to see some hands, because it's great that I get adults in there. Do any of you remember, and you have to go way back, and there's some people that, what is he talking about? In those days, I'm talking about the early 50s, the shoe manufacturers made shoes, and they had a material, that soles, that was a real spongy, it was called crepe soles. Anybody remember that? Yeah, you remember that? Well, we came from New York, hadn't been here a year yet, came to Los Angeles, and one day I came to class, and as I opened up the door, I was shocked to see all the kids in their seats, quietly, and the teacher said, "Peter, I appreciate the fact that, you don't know about all the things that we do here, but when the bell rings, you have to be in your seat. And you're late now." But she says, "I appreciate the fact that you're not disturbing the class, that you walked in so quietly." And I said, "It's because of the crap on my shoes." I mean, crap, crepe, it's all the same. All the same. So, anyway, we came to the West Coast. Never talked much about my experience. Probably psychologically, friends knew. Yeah, they had my attitude was, doesn't every kid go through this? No, I don't think so. But all of this changed. And it was in October of 1992. I've been in America for over 50-some years. I went to school here. I was in the U.S. Army here. And it was at a point where I thought about Klaus and Rufina so many times. Those dear, dear, courageous people that saved our lives. Thought about it all the time. And one day I get a call. I have 3 sons, and one of my sons, because of his work, he and his wife got transferred to Brussels, Belgium, the country just south of Holland. And he called up and said, "Dad, why don't you guys come out for the holidays?" I was so excited because I'd never been back. Still knew the language, so. I was so excited, but then I got a sick feeling. I had no idea where was this village, where was this farm, where were we hiding? My mom was quite ill at the time, and she didn't remember either. She didn't remember. I said, "Mom," and then she came up with a name, the Veneburen. And the more I said that word, Veneburen, it came to me that that was the name of the dirt road that the farm was on, which is great. Where? What am I going to do? Go to a foreign country and ask them about a dirt road? She said that's all she remembered. I went to the library, went to look at all these names, and there was another name, Makincha. And the more I said the word, doesn't mean anything. I asked Mom, were we in Makin? She didn't know anything. That's all we had to go on. That's all we had to go on. My wife and I flew to Europe, spent a week in Belgium with my son and his wife, and then we drove to Amsterdam. It's only about a 2.5-hour drive. The distances there aren't what they are here. And it was really a big thrill because as soon as we got into the Netherlands, I could still read the advertising signs. I couldn't have thought of them, but when I read them, I knew what it meant. And I remember standing downtown in Amsterdam. The only thing that I remember seeing that I didn't recall when I was there was the Golden Arches. I didn't remember. And so we became tourists. We took the canal cruise and we visited the Anne Frank house. And by the way, I might mention to those, many of you, when you were at one time or another familiar with the diary of Anne Frank, one Jewish girl who was in hiding with 7 other people and betrayed. And to this day, it is not known for sure who betrayed them. She ended up being deported to a camp called Bergen-Belsen, where she died of typhoid fever 2 weeks before liberation. Anyway, I told my son, I said, this Makincha really doesn't mean anything. It's another 1.5 hours north. He says, "Hey, we're here, let's do it." We drive north, there's a sign off the highway, and we come into this quaint village. And as we drove a couple of blocks, there was a little bank. It was called Rowboat Bank. And I told my son, he was driving, I said, "Go in there." I said, "I'm going to go make a fool of myself now. I'm in a foreign country. All I know is that name that Mom remembered, which I know was a dirt road." And we go inside of the bank, and the lady says, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "This is embarrassing." She says, "We're from America." I said, "Have you by any chance heard of a dirt road called the Veneburen?" And I'm ready to say, "Hey, I'm so sorry." She says, "Sir, would you repeat that name?" I said, "Why?" She says, I just want to hear it again." I said, did I mispronounce the Veneburen? She says, "That's about 5 minutes from here." I said, oh my God, that was so emotional. My daughter-in-law, my wife, my son and I, we were hugging, we were crying. Having found, not even knowing where we were, and we found it. In my case, stepping back into my history of almost 60 years, we were making such a racket, and the manager came out, probably thought it was a holdup. He asked us in the office, and I asked him right away, I said, "Have you ever heard of the Klaus and Rufina Post family?" He says, "Yes, I have." I said, "No." I said, "How did you know them?" He says, my predecessor, something to the effect, introduced me, they used to bank here. And then I asked a stupid question, I said, what happened to them? Which was really a stupid question, because by that time they would have been, I don't know, 120 years old, or you know, would have been way old. And he said they both passed away in the early 80s. And you know, I've told this story so many times, but when I get to that, it still doesn't feel good. You know, regret is an awful thing. I can't bring them back. Why didn't I go back sooner? Give him a hug. Thank you for saving my life. Anyway, the guy said that farm is still there. He says, I'm sure the people that you look around. Well, we walked out of that bank in a daze. We get in the car, we get on the dirt road, and there it is, the theater building. Thank you, Mom. She remembered the name of the dirt road. And we drove up about a quarter of a mile, and I said, oh my God, there it is. I recognize the farmhouse. New paint, new roof, it's gotten bigger. A lot of foliage, of course, in almost 60 years. And then when we got over there, I knocked on the door, and I don't know why, nobody was home. I was so hoping to go inside and go in that room where Klaus cut those boards to see if those, after 60 years, maybe it's got a new floor, I don't know. Well, nobody was home, and this was in the second week of December. It was pretty frosty. I said, I want to go into that little forest, just to see if there's some remnant of this cave that I helped Klaus build. And we walked around the house. Every time I got to the back of the house, weirdest thing, I felt like I was 7, 8 years old again. You know, that's why I used to be able to play at dusk. And then we walked into this forest. For whatever reason, we split up. My family goes one way looking, I go another way. And every time there was a little rise in the ground, there's some dirt, I kind of step on it and say, you know, could have been right here, you know, I don't know. We were in there for 10 minutes, and about 40, 50 feet away, my son calls out, Dad, come here, I found it. And folks, there was the cave like I left it 60 years ago. It didn't have the twigs in the front anymore, of course. This is a picture of Lena, who was the daughter of Klaus and Rufina. I never met her. She was 15 when Mom and I got to the farm. She became a domestic or something. I never met her. But on one of her, she lived in the city of Delft. And she came in 1998. I just loved that pensive look on her face, and you know, thinking back about what her parents did. I had a little screwdriver on my keychain. Still, matter of fact, it's lasted all that long. Still have it. I carved my mom and my initials in one of those logs. Ellie and Peter. Unbelievable. After all these years, those should be there. We spent a whole day there reminiscing, you know, over bad times. And we drove back to Brussels. And something that I had told people and friends for many years, and they all said, what are you, some kind of a nut? And I said, yeah, just ask my wife. And that was, if I ever had the opportunity, I wanted to visit the site of a Nazi death camp. And after we got back to Brussels, my son had made some arrangement. And a couple of weeks later, we flew on LOT, L-O-T Airlines, to Polish National Airline. And we flew to Poland, to a beautiful, beautiful medieval city. A city 12 years old. However, a 20-minute drive outside of this beautiful medieval city was the largest, the most inhumane piece of hell that man ever created for man, called Auschwitz-Birkenau. Auschwitz-Birkenau was a camp that covered 15 square miles. At any given time, it held over 155,000 prisoners. It still has one of the main entrances. Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free. Yeah, right. I took some photograph. Any history books will always show that building because railroad tracks came from all over Europe, always went through that tunnel, inside. Once they got inside of that tunnel, they were told to get out. That was referred to as the area of selection. Those lines could be a mile long. Trains kept going 24/7, never stopped, never stopped, never stopped. Depending where they came from, and when I say trains, they were cattle cars that would normally hold, I don't know, 30, 50 head of cattle. They'd have 200, 300 people on there. The only thing they had at the top of one of those carts, one square hole cut out with barbed wire for air. No food, no water, no toilet. And depending what city they were arrested in, some of them took 2 days to get over to Auschwitz, to Poland. About 10% after they opened the doors were dead. Didn't even survive. Didn't even survive. They were told to separate. They had women with babies and little children and old people in one group, and they had the young people that could be used for slave labor in the other. They were just told to stand there. Didn't matter if it was 30 below zero. They didn't know why they were there. What happened? Where's my family? What are we doing here? Where are we? And they were told to advance to a table with a Nazi officer. And all he did is point. Right. Left. If you went left, it was usually the young people, the slave labor camp. In most cases, they wouldn't last more than 2 or 3 weeks. And one square piece of bread, one sip of water a day. The women with the babies, and the women with little children, and the old people were told something different. You've been on a train, you're filthy, you got to take a shower. Well, I don't know, at that point, I can only imagine a shower probably didn't sound so terrible. After being dehumanized, being taken away from the family, not knowing why they were there, for what reason. Where's my family? A shower probably didn't sound so bad, and they were given a towel. No panic. And then they were let underground into a concrete bunker. There were 3 of those that could hold about 300 people. There were 3 others that could hold 1,000 people. And when the people went inside, you look up at the ceiling, there were shower heads. No panic there, let them take a shower. And then they were giving instructions, man, woman, and children, all of you, remove all of your clothes, hang it up on the hooks on the wall. Make sure after you shower, you pick up your own clothes. After those instructions, the metal door shut. Some panels opened up in the ceiling. There were some German soldiers with 2-pound canisters of pellets called Zyklon V. They were cyanide pills. They just dumped them down. When they did that, all hell broke loose. People screaming, people coughing, people choking. Between 1.5 and 3 minutes, another 1,000 Jews lay dead. Those were the gas chambers. In the back of the gas chambers, there were some mini trolley rails with carts. Some of those people that still had the wayabouts, the young people in the slave labor camps came out with meat hooks. and they piled the bodies up 10 feet tall, 2 blocks long in front of the crematorium. There were days between the gas chamber and the crematorium that they got rid of 4,000 people in a day. 4,000 in a day. I took some photographs. The entire camp was surrounded by 50,000 volt high tension wires. You see one of the old gun towers in the back, one of the crematoria. Got a close-up of one of the crematoria, one of the ovens. They would put upward of 8 bodies in each one of those on top of each other before cremating them. This, and I don't think we've got kids here that young. In schools, I don't tell that, but I think I will. I met a so-called camp survivor, an Auschwitz camp survivor, about 10 years ago. And he was sent to Auschwitz when he was 12 years old. And he told me at that time, he survived, and he told me at that time when he arrived there, there was this stench, this horrible stench that never cleared the air. It never cleared the air. And he asked one of the camp guards, "What is that smell?" And he pointed at one of the chimneys and said, "That's your grandparents burning." Can you imagine telling this to a 12 years old? I took a photograph. Usually when you see a lamp or a light at the end of a railroad track, it usually indicates the end of the railroad line. I see it was pretty frosty. I took a picture. I called it the end of the line, but I really don't mean the end of the railroad line. In that one camp alone, Auschwitz-Birkenau, they murdered 1,100,000 people. Just that one camp alone. We're going to come to the end, folks. Bear with me. And one of the things I always like to point out, and that's mentioned at the very beginning, that I don't go into politics. And I have a little thing that I scribble. And I want you to see this. Webster's Dictionary. Propaganda. Misleading information to promote a particular cause of view. Misleading. So much truth. And this much lies. Now I'm going to show you a slide. And I can almost think that some of you are thinking certain things. And I can tell you that you're already wrong. What the heck is he talking about? I'm going to show you a saying. If you tell a big enough lie and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. I'm going to repeat it. If you tell a lie big enough, just keep repeating it, people eventually come to believe it. The guy that said that was Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister. He is the one that came up with that saying. The Germans are not fools. They're not stupid people. And even in those days, they had an individual, part of the government, that only had one job. Propaganda. It works. It works. If people don't use their heads and say, yeah, that's, Uncle Charlie says this is happening. Yeah, go along with it instead of looking up the truth and see, in fact, what actually did happen. There have been a number of times, and today, in the world's atmosphere as it is, there are actually people
Louder, please.
There are actually people that say that this event never happened. Really? Really? Well, I'm going to just tell you that. If they are deniers, they display stupidity and ignorance, racism. They spread untruth based on opinions, discarding facts. It's scapegoating. If you take a history book, and when you're talking about this event called the Holocaust, it is recognized as one of the most, I'm going to stop, one of the most documented and recorded events in history. Not an opinion, documented. Literally documented. And who did most of the documentation? The Germans. The Germans did. Now, only in a very small way, when I visited Auschwitz death camp, after which is the time that I started to tell my story as I remembered it. They have a very large museum over there. Pretty sad. And amongst that, I found a transport list showing the murder of my father, my grandparents, and uncle in Auschwitz. Now, only in the smallest way, this is the proof. It is not an opinion. Everybody's got a right to an opinion, but don't make it a fact. You got to back it up with factual evidence. Otherwise, yeah, you have a right to your opinion, but unless you back it up with reality. Now, for some of you folks that remember World War II as a whole, it wasn't all that long ago that I did a presentation for a retired military unit. And one guy came up with, in so many words, politely, but ignorant, you know, I'm not so sure that it was quite as bad as it was. Okay, really? Well, let me show you something that I looked at, again, to come up with proof, not opinions. In 1945, there was a man. His name was David Eisenhower. Eisenhower was a 5-star general in the United States Army. They don't make those anymore. The last 5-star was in 1950, Omar Bradley. You've heard of the Bradley tank. 4-star is as big as they come. But Ike had 5 stars. He also was the engineer of the D-Day landing, the largest expeditionary force to ever invade. And he wiped out Hitler's war machine. Not just to make excuses, what some people might think, but I Googled it. You can just Google it. And guess what I found? General Eisenhower instructs reporters to report death camp atrocities. At the end of World War II, Eisenhower made a decision to personally visit as many Nazi concentration camps as he could. His reason, he wanted to document the camps and their appalling condition. The thing that amazes me more than that, here, the general of the armies, as big, as powerful as you can be, anticipating a time when Nazi atrocities might be denied, Eisenhower ordered the filming. He could see 80 years ago there are going to be people who say, it's exaggerated. Never happened. Well, tell the general. Tell the general. It's not my story. Now, I'm going to show you one more picture. And this is an audience participation. I don't know why I put that in. When you see that picture, I want to hear it. Oh. Are you ready? How about those buck teeth? How do you like these pants? I like those pants. And I had hair. That's the most important thing. So, let me just sign off and say this. All I can hope for is tolerance. What is tolerance? It's just the willingness to accept opinions or behavior without hurting somebody else, which is different from one's own. Just because you don't look the same, just because you don't pray the same, just because you don't live in the same place, just because you don't have hair or do have hair, so what? So what? Live your life. And the most important thing relevant to that, and to me that is really, really important with the youngsters when I talk to them, use independent thinking. I just hate to hear somebody say, you know, my Uncle Charlie said, blah, 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 blah. Well, your Uncle Charlie is full of it. He doesn't know what happened. He's given an opinion. Try and think independently. Look it up. Now, when I say look it up, this is something that a lot of people don't know. And I only use the word this time, one time, and that is this. There are, I would say, 12.5, maybe more, so-called fact-finding organizations that have nothing to do with politics. They're not Democrats, they're not Republicans. They just get money from well-to-do people that say all we want is the truth. You can look those people up. Don't go look the Democratic Party, the Republican. Hey, yeah, you're going to get biased, of course. But there are so many of these outfits that all they do is look up facts, actual facts. Then base your opinion on those, and hopefully when you do that, with the education of knowing what in fact happened, I think we can all make a little effort in making this a little bit of a better world. Thank you so much.